On a bone-chilling rainy night, I saw my son standing in the middle of the bridge, dragging a safe from the trunk of his car before throwing it into the black water. Before I could run over, he sped away like he was running from something. Then I heard a faint tap, tap, beneath the water. I jumped in, dragged the safe to shore, and smashed the lock open. I froze as if I had died on the spot. Inside was a purple-lipped baby girl, barely alive, wrapped in the wool blanket my late wife had knitted years ago. Take a breath with me before we begin. Before we continue, drop a quick comment for me. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night where you are? Your presence here truly matters. Just a quick note, some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. What matters most is the message at its heart. After 30 years in Montana's copper mines, I learned to smell gas before an explosion. And that October evening, standing on my porch overlooking Flathead Lake, I smelled gas. Not literal methane. The air was clean and cold, carrying the scent of pine and the mineral tang of the lake. The sun sat low over the Mission Mountains, turning the water the color of burnt copper. I stood there at 56 years old, retired from Stillwater mining for 3 years now, holding my Army green thermos, the same one I'd carried underground on every shift since 1994, and felt the tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart. I'd felt this before. In 2003, standing in a tunnel 2,000 feet below ground, moments before a support beam cracked. In 2011, walking past a ventilation shaft that would collapse 6 hours later. In 2019, the morning of the day 3 miners got trapped in a side gallery, and I led the rescue team that brought them out alive. Every time, the same sensation. Everything appears normal, but your body knows better. I poured coffee into the thermos cap, the steam rising into the cold air. The lake was mirror still. My small log cabin sat alone on this stretch of shore north of Polson, surrounded by ponderosa pines, and the kind of silence that should have felt peaceful. My wife Elena had loved this view before the accident took her 18 years ago. My son Merritt used to fish off that dock every summer before he moved to the city, made his money, forgot how to call his father. When was the last time he called 3 weeks a month? I sipped the coffee, too bitter like always, and tried to identify what was wrong. Not chest pain. My cardiologist had cleared me in August. Not weather. The forecast showed clear skies for a week. Not the cabin. I'd checked the foundation, the roof, the propane lines just last Tuesday. But something was coming. I knew it the way I'd known, which tunnels to avoid, which crews to pull out early, which rescue attempts would succeed, and which would find bodies instead of survivors. The sun touched the horizon, and I went inside. My living room smelled like wood smoke and old coffee. I switched on the television, a habit from my mining days, always checking news for accidents, always waiting for the call that would send me back underground with a rescue team. The local news filled the screen, and I was reaching for the remote when I saw him. Merritt. My son sat in a television studio separated from me by 200 miles and whatever had grown between us in the years since Elena died. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. The silver tie perfectly knotted his dark hair, styled like he was heading to a board meeting instead of begging for help finding his missing wife. "I still believe Saskia will come back," he said, his voice steady with just the right tremor of emotion. "I have to believe that. Every day I wake up hoping today will be the day." The news anchor, a woman in her 40s with the professional sympathy they teach in journalism school, leaned forward. "It's been 8 months since your wife disappeared. What keeps you going?" "Our daughter," Merritt said. He touched his eyes with his knuckles, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he'd try to squeeze out tears to avoid punishment. "Dove needs her mother. She's only 8 months old. She'll never remember Saskia unless we bring her home." The camera zoomed closer. I watched my son's face fill the screen, 38 years old, successful venture capitalist husband, father, appealing to strangers for help finding the woman he'd married. Maybe you've never felt it, that certainty that something is wrong despite every visible sign saying otherwise. But if you'd spent 3 decades reading fault lines in rock and microfractures in support beams, if you'd learned that the difference between coming home and dying underground was noticing what everyone else missed, you'd trust it too. I leaned forward, studying Merritt's face the way I'd once studied tunnel walls for stress cracks. His eyes were red. His voice caught at the right moments. His hands trembled slightly when he held up a photo of Saskia, a beautiful woman with auburn hair and a genuine smile that had always seemed too warm for my cold, calculating son. But something was wrong. I'd supervised rescue operations. I'd held men while they wept for trapped brothers. I'd watched fathers learn their sons were dead, watched husbands collapse when we brought out body bags instead of survivors. I knew what real grief looked like. This wasn't it. Merritt's micro-expressions were off the brief flash of irritation when the anchor interrupted him, the way his shoulders relaxed instead of tensed when discussing Saskia's disappearance, the precise control in his voice that came from rehearsal instead of raw emotion. "If anyone has information, anything at all, please call the tip line," he said, looking directly into the camera. "I just want my wife home." And then I saw it, the tell. His left eye, the one the camera angle couldn't quite capture, was completely dry. Not glistening with tears. Not red from crying. Dry. While the right eye showed all the theatrical signs of grief, the hidden eye told the truth. My son wasn't grieving. He was performing. The tightness in my chest expanded into something colder. I'd taught Merritt to fish in that lake. I'd held him when Elena died. I'd paid for his education, celebrated his successes, tried to understand why he'd grown distant, why his calls came less frequently, why he'd moved his pregnant wife to the city and built a life that had no space for a retired mining engineer in a cabin by a lake. Now I understood why he'd stopped calling. You can't lie to someone who spent 30 years detecting lies told by rock and metal and gas, who learned that what you can't see will kill you faster than what you can. I stared at my son on that screen, $3,000 suit, perfect hair, calculated tears, and understood that everything I feared was true. Merritt was lying. The only question was, what had he done to his wife, and why did every instinct I possessed tell me that whatever was coming would be worse than anything I'd faced in 30 years underground? 3 weeks crawled by with that image burned into my mind. My son's dry eye staring into a camera, performing grief he didn't feel. The chest pain woke me at 1:47 a.m. Not the crushing kind that sends you to the ER, but the tight warning grip that had plagued me since that television interview. And through my bedroom window, I could hear the October storm tearing at the trees around Flathead Lake. I lay in the dark listening to rain hammer the roof and knew I wouldn't sleep again. At 2:04 a.m. I gave up, pulled on jeans and my old work jacket and climbed into my Ford F-15. The same truck that had carried me to mine sites across Montana for 3 decades now carried me through sheets of rain toward Polson Bridge, my usual destination when insomnia and chest pain conspired to drive me from my empty cabin. The storm had turned U.S. Highway 93 into a river. My wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. When I reached the bridge, a quarter-mile span of steel and concrete crossing the Flathead River where it narrowed between the lake and the bay, I expected to see nothing but darkness and water. Instead, I saw a black Range Rover Sport parked mid-span, no lights, hazards off, sitting in the rain like it had materialized from the storm itself. I knew that vehicle. I'd sat in the passenger seat 5 weeks ago when Merritt drove me to lunch in Kalispell, letting me feel the leather seats and the dashboard that looked like a spaceship control panel. I'd memorized the license plate without meaning to, the way you remember details when your son is showing off wealth you'll never understand. "That's Merritt's car," I said aloud to no one in my truck cab. But Merritt had called me yesterday afternoon from Chicago, a business conference. 3 days of meetings with venture capital firms, he'd said. His voice had that hollow quality of hotel rooms and airport terminals. Or maybe just lies. I killed my headlights and pulled onto the shoulder 200 feet from the bridge. Lightning flashed across the lake, illuminating the Range Rover in stark relief. No movement, no driver visible through the rain-streaked windows. My hand found the door handle. 30 years descending into unstable tunnels and gas-filled shafts had taught me sometimes you approach danger in the dark, watching for signs everyone else would miss. I stepped into the rain. The cold hit like a physical blow. October in Montana feels like winter anywhere else. I stayed low, using the bridge railing for cover, my boots silent on wet pavement. The river below roared with storm runoff 20 feet down and moving fast enough to strip skin from bone. You need to understand something about mining engineering. You learn to move toward danger, not away from it. It's not bravery. It's training overriding survival instinct. You see the warning signs, unstable rock gas buildup, structural stress, and you move closer to assess the threat, not farther to ignore it. That's why when the Range Rover's driver door opened 50 feet ahead, I didn't run. I crouched behind the concrete barrier and watched. Merritt stepped into the rain. My son wore a black raincoat hood up, moving with the quick efficiency of someone who'd planned this. He scanned the bridge once I pressed myself against cold concrete, barely breathing, then moved to the Range Rover's rear hatch. Lightning flashed again. In that brief illumination, I saw him pull something from the cargo area. Steel gray metal, rectangular, a fireproof safe, the expensive kind that weighs 40 kilograms empty and costs more than my truck. Merritt struggled with the weight, half carrying, half dragging it to the bridge railing. His boots scraped pavement. His breath came in visible gasps despite the rain. He glanced around once more, still didn't see me in the shadows, then bent his knees, positioned his hands, and shoved. The safe toppled over the railing. For one suspended moment, it seemed to hang in the air, tumbling, catching what little light the storm clouds allowed. Then it hit the water with a sound like a gunshot, swallowed immediately by the current. Merritt stood there for exactly 5 seconds, watching the spot where the safe had disappeared. Then he climbed back into his Range Rover, started the engine, no hesitation, no ceremony, and drove away. His taillights vanished into rain and darkness, heading south toward Polson. I stayed frozen behind the barrier, my heart hammering against ribs that already hurt, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My son, throwing a safe into the river at 2 a.m, during a storm, when he was supposed to be in Chicago. The rain pounded, the river roared, and then barely audible over the storm, almost lost in the wind and water, I heard it. Tap, 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 faint, metallic, rhythmic, coming from the river below. Later I would learn the safe's seal had been deliberately left with a hairline gap, not enough to let water in quickly, but enough to allow a trickle of air. Whether Merritt had done it by accident or design didn't matter then. What mattered was that she was still breathing. I was on my feet before the thought fully formed, sprinting to the railing, staring down at black water churning with storm debris. The tapping continued, weak, desperate, the sound of something or someone trapped inside 40 kilograms of sinking steel. "Oh God," I whispered. Someone was in that safe. Someone alive. Drowning. My son had just tried to murder someone by throwing them into the Flathead River, and that someone was still conscious, still fighting, still tapping out a plea that only I could hear. The tapping grew fainter, slower. The safe was sinking, filling with water, and whoever was inside. I didn't finish the thought. My legs were already moving, carrying me along the bridge to the access path down the muddy embankment toward the river's edge. 30 years of mine rescues had taught me that thinking gets people killed. You assess the danger in seconds, you move, you save who you can save. The banging was getting weaker. Whatever was in that safe was running out of time, and my son, my own son, had just tried to murder it. I hit the water's edge boots, sinking into mud, and stared at the churning current, searching for any sign of the safe. My body moved before my mind could catch up with what I already knew. I was about to find out exactly what Merritt had done, and the river was faster and colder than anything I'd felt in 30 years underground. I hit the water-running boots first, no hesitation. The river swallowed me whole. The cold was a physical blow, colder than the ice water flooding through a ruptured cooling line in the Stillwater mine, colder than the January morning I helped pull 2 trapped miners from a shaft filled with snowmelt. So cold my lungs seized and refused to work for 3 seconds that stretched into eternity. Then training overrode shock. Breathe, orient, move. The safe was 10 yards out, barely visible above the waterline, sinking with the patient inevitability of heavy steel meeting fast water. Storm runoff had turned the Flathead River into something violent and alive, pulling at my legs, filling my boots with liquid weight. I kicked forward. 3 strokes. 5. The current fought every movement, trying to sweep me downstream toward the dam drop-off a quarter-mile south, where the river fell 30 feet onto rocks that would turn anything safe body rescue attempt into broken pieces. "Move," I gasped. "Swim." My arms felt like lead. When did I get this old? 56 shouldn't feel like 70, but 3 years of retirement had softened muscles that 30 years underground had kept hard. Every stroke was a negotiation between what my mind demanded and what my body could deliver. 10 yards became 8, then 6. The rain hammered the water's surface, turning visibility into a gray soup of storm and river. Lightning flashed, illuminating the safe for one brief second, steel gray, metal commercial grade, the kind banks use. The kind designed to be fireproof, waterproof, secure. The kind that would become a coffin if I didn't reach it in the next 30 seconds. 4 yards, 3. My left knee, the one I'd shattered in the 2011 tunnel collapse when a support beam gave way and pinned me against a minecart, sent up its familiar scream of protest. Metal pins and surgical screws held the joint together, but cold water and desperate swimming were asking it to do things it hadn't been designed to do since the accident. 2 yards. I could still hear the banging, faint, rhythmic, desperate, tap, tap, tap. Each impact weaker than the last, but still there, still fighting. "Hold on," I said to the darkness and the storm and whoever was dying inside that steel box. "Hold on." My fingers found metal, the safe's handle cold and slippery but solid. Real. I wrapped both arms around it and pulled. Nothing happened. 40 kilograms of steel and whoever was inside all of it, trying to sink all of it, caught in current that wanted to drag us both downstream. I kicked, pulling the safe toward my chest, angling my body toward shore. 1 foot of progress, maybe 2. My knee screamed louder. The cold had turned my hands into clumsy clubs that barely responded to commands. But the banging continued slower now, the intervals stretching, and that sound was the only thing that mattered. I'd supervised 11 rescue operations. 11 times when rock falls or equipment failures or gas buildups trapped men in places they shouldn't be. 9 times we brought them out alive. Twice we brought out bodies. But none of those rescues mattered if I couldn't save this one. I kicked again. Pulled. The riverbank was 20 feet away, 15 each foot earned through a combination of technique I barely remembered and desperation I felt in every frozen muscle. Pull, I gasped. Breathe, pull. My boot found muddy bottom. I braced, pulled, took 2 steps, and my knee gave out completely. I went down hard water over my head, the safe's weight trying to drag me back into deeper current. I came up spitting river water that tasted like minerals and rain and the possibility of failure. No, I said, to my knee, to my age, to 30 years of physical limitations I'd ignored until they couldn't be ignored anymore. Not now. I grabbed the handle again, wrapped my arms around steel that felt like ice, and pulled with everything I had left. My knee held barely, and I took 3 staggering steps up the muddy embankment. 10 feet from the water, then 12. The banging was noticeably weaker now. The rhythm had changed from desperate SOS to something slower, more irregular. The sound of someone running out of strength, out of air, out of time. Almost there, I said, to them, to myself. Almost. My knee collapsed again. I went down in the mud, still holding the safe, dragging it with me through a combination of momentum and refusal to let go. 15 feet from the water, I pulled, crawled, pulled again. My hands were so numb I couldn't feel the steel anymore, just the vague awareness that I was gripping something solid. Rain pounded my back. The river roared behind me, furious that I'd stolen something it wanted to keep. 20 feet. The banging stopped. Complete silence except for rain hammering mud and my own gasping breath and the thunder that rolled across the lake like God clearing his throat. I froze, still gripping the safe water streaming from my clothes. Nothing. No sound from inside, no movement. Just steel and silence and the terrible possibility that I'd been too slow, too old, too late. Then one more tap. Weak, desperate, final. "I'm here," I shouted, my voice raw. "I'm here. Hold on." I collapsed beside the safe mud under my hands, my knee. A white-hot scream I couldn't afford to acknowledge. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. My vision swam with exhaustion and cold, and the kind of adrenaline crash that comes when your body realizes what you've just asked it to do. The banging had stopped again, completely stopped. My frozen fingers found the safe's lock, a heavy-duty combination mechanism on the front face built to withstand fire and theft and everything except a desperate 56-year-old man with no tools and no time. I pulled at it, twisted. The mechanism didn't budge, rusted or jammed or deliberately locked, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had maybe 10 seconds, maybe none, to get it open before whoever was inside ran out of time entirely. And I had nothing but a river stone and failing strength and the terrible knowledge that I'd just watched my son try to commit murder. I grabbed a river stone the size of my fist and swung. The first strike barely dented the lock. The second made it rattle. The third split skin across my knuckles, blood mixing with river water and rain. The fourth strike shattered the lock mechanism in 3 of my knuckles. I felt the bones crack but couldn't afford to care because the safe's lid finally gave way under my bleeding hands. I wrenched it open, my phone's flashlight trembling as I aimed it inside. A baby. Not an adult, not Saskia, not anyone I'd expected. An infant, maybe 8 months old, lay motionless on the safe's bottom, wrapped in a cream-colored wool blanket. Her lips were purple, the color of bruises. Her skin was pale as wax. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God, it's a baby." My hands were inside the safe before my mind caught up, lifting her with the careful urgency that comes from decades of rescue work. She was so small. Too small to survive what she'd just been through. Too small for the weight my son had tried to give her, the weight of water and steel and deliberate murder. I laid her on the mud phone flashlight, positioned to see her face, and pressed my ear to her tiny chest. Nothing. Then so faint I almost missed it, a flutter, a whisper of a heartbeat, weak and irregular, but there. "You're alive," I said. "Stay alive. Please stay alive." I pulled the wet blanket away from her face to check her airway, and my hands froze. I knew this blanket. Cream-colored wool, hand-knitted with a distinctive cable pattern running down the center. The edges were frayed now, 38 years of storage and use taking their toll, but I recognized every stitch. Elena had made this blanket for Merritt when he was born. I'd watched her work on it for 3 months during her pregnancy, sitting in our first apartment's awful rocking chair, counting stitches by lamplight. She'd finished it 2 days before Merritt arrived, wrapped our newborn son in it, told me this blanket would keep him safe forever. Elena had been dead for 18 years. The blanket should have been in storage, or given away, or lost in one of Merritt's many moves. Instead, it was here in a safe wrapped around a baby my son had tried to drown. I looked down at the infant's wrist and saw a silver bracelet, the kind hospitals use, but nicer engraved metal that caught the flashlight beam. 2 words: Dove Redmond. Redmond. My surname. Not Merritt's wife's maiden name. Not some stranger's child. This baby carried my family name wrapped in my dead wife's blanket, left to drown by my son. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Who are you, Dove?" She didn't answer. Her lips stayed purple, her tiny chest barely moved. My wife knitted that blanket in our first apartment, the one with the broken heating, sitting by that window for the light because we couldn't afford good lamps. She'd been gone 18 years. And now her blanket was wrapped around a baby my son had tried to murder, and I had no idea why. I shook myself. Questions could wait. The baby couldn't. I stripped off my flannel jacket, soaked through, but warmer than nothing, and wrapped it around her, holding her against my chest. Her skin was so cold it burned to touch. I pulled my phone with shaking fingers and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Polson Bridge, U.S. Highway 93, female infant, approximately 8 months old, severe hypothermia, cyanotic respiratory depression. Sir, is the infant breathing? I pressed my ear to her again, felt the whisper of breath against my cold cheek. Barely, maybe 6 breaths a minute. I can feel her heart, but it's weak. Is she responsive? Can you? I'm a retired mining engineer, I interrupted. 30 years of emergency response training. I know what I'm looking at. This baby has minutes, not hours. How far out is the ambulance? A pause, keys clicking. 6 minutes. Sir, I need you to... I'm putting her in my truck with the heater on full blast, I said, already moving the baby pressed against my chest, my destroyed knee screaming with every step up the muddy embankment toward the bridge. Meet me at the bridge. I'll have my flashers on. Sir, please stay on the line. I hung up. You need to understand I'd coordinated hundreds of emergency responses in mining operations, cave-ins, gas leaks, equipment failures that turned men into casualties. I knew the protocols. I knew the language. But calling for help instead of giving it, that reversal made my voice shake more than the cold or the fear. My truck was where I'd left it, door still open from my sprint to the bridge railing. I climbed in, cradling the baby with one arm, and cranked the heat to maximum. The engine was still warm. Hot air blasted from the vents. I positioned her against my chest, my soaked shirt and her wet blanket creating a terrible combination, but the truck's heat would fix that, had to fix that. She was so small in my arms, so impossibly fragile. Her breath whispered against my neck, still breathing, still fighting. 6 minutes, I told her. The ambulance is 6 minutes away. You can make it 6 minutes. You survived whatever hell my son put you through. You can survive 6 more minutes. In the distance, I heard sirens. I sat there with the heater blasting, holding this baby Dove Redmond. The bracelet said my surname, but a name I'd never heard, against my chest, feeling her shallow breaths, watching her purple lips, and understanding 3 things simultaneously. My son had tried to murder an infant. That infant was wrapped in my dead wife's blanket. And whoever this baby was, she was connected to my family in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The ambulance sirens were getting closer, but not nearly fast enough. What I didn't know yet, what would shatter everything in the next 12 hours, was exactly how this baby was connected to me. That she wasn't just connected, that she was mine to save in ways deeper than a rescue. The lights appeared over the hill, red and white, cutting through the rain, and I whispered to the dying child in my arms, "Hold on." The ambulance doors slammed open at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center's emergency entrance, and the world became a blur of green scrubs and barked commands. Dr. Celeste Garrison, 48 years old, with thick glasses and the methodical manner of someone who'd seen everything, took one look at Dove's purple lips and said, "Pediatric code hypothermia protocol, get me warm saline and the neonatal team now." Then my granddaughter. Though I didn't know that word applied, yet disappeared behind a wall of urgent hands and medical equipment, and I was left standing in the fluorescent brightness of a hospital corridor at 3:30 in the morning, soaking wet, bleeding from my knuckles, my knee screaming, watching doctors fight to save a baby whose name I'd learned from a bracelet 20 minutes ago. A nurse guided me to a plastic chair in the waiting room. Someone brought me coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. I didn't drink it. I sat there with my hands shaking, mud drying on my jeans, and waited. 2 hours later, Dr. Garrison emerged, her scrubs spattered with evidence of the fight she'd just finished. "The baby's alive," she said, and I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time since I'd heard that tapping sound. "Stable but critical. Severe hypothermia, cerebral hypoxia from oxygen deprivation. The next 48 hours will be decisive." "Can I see her?" "Not yet. She's in the neonatal ICU." Dr. Garrison sat in the plastic chair beside me, and I saw exhaustion written across her face. "But there's something else. Something wrong." "Wrong how?" "The baby has no medical records," she said. "No birth certificate, no vaccination history, no insurance information, no pediatrician on file. We ran her through every database we have access to. Legally speaking, this 8-month-old child doesn't exist." I stared at her, trying to process words that made no sense. "What do you mean she doesn't exist?" "I mean, someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure she never appeared in any official system," Dr. Garrison said. "That takes planning, resources, and a reason I can't begin to imagine." She left me with that, returning to her other patients, and I sat in the waiting room watching dawn break through the windows and tried to understand how you erase a baby from existence. How do you erase a baby from existence? Not metaphorically, literally. How do you ensure no hospital, no database, no government registry has any record that a child was ever born? What kind of planning does that require? What kind of intent? At 6:15, a woman in a dark blazer walked through the emergency department doors with the kind of purposeful stride that announced law enforcement before she showed her badge. "Mr. Redmond," she was 43 maybe, with dark eyes that seemed engineered to detect lies. "I'm Detective Simone Ashford, Lake County Sheriff's Office. I need to ask you some questions about tonight." We moved to a small consultation room that smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. She pulled out a notebook, clicked a pen, and studied me with an expression I'd seen before, the look investigators give witnesses whose stories sound too convenient. "You're certain it was your son who threw the safe?" she asked. "In darkness, in heavy rain, from what distance?" "I was 200 feet away," I said, "but yes, I'm certain." "How can you be certain? The conditions." "I recognize the Range Rover. I went to the dealership with him when he bought it. I know that license plate." My voice was steady despite the exhaustion. "I recognized my son's build, his movements. And when I opened the safe, I recognized my wife's blanket, the one she knitted for him 38 years ago. The baby wore a bracelet with my surname. So yes, Detective, I'm certain." She made notes, asked more questions, took my statement about the television interview, the chest pain, the drive to the bridge, everything I'd seen. 3 hours of questions that circled around the same suspicion. Was I absolutely sure? I was sure. She left, promising to follow up, and I returned to the waiting room to watch nurses move past with purpose while I sat useless and waiting. The next morning, 18 hours after I'd pulled a safe from a river, Detective Ashford returned with a manila folder and an expression that made my stomach drop. "Conference room," she said. "There's something you need to see." The room was small, windowless, with a table and 4 chairs. She spread 2 documents across the surface like evidence at a trial. "We fast-tracked DNA analysis," she said. "Given the circumstances..." I looked at the first document. Genetic markers, percentages, technical language I barely understood. "The baby shares 25% of your DNA," Detective Ashford said. "That's conclusive for a grandparent-grandchild relationship. Dove Redmond is your biological granddaughter, Merritt Redmond's daughter." The words landed like physical blows. Granddaughter. My granddaughter. The baby I'd pulled from the river wasn't just some child my son had tried to murder. She was family. My family. "But there's more," the detective continued, pushing the second document toward me. "We found a death certificate." I looked down at official letterhead, raised seal, precise typed information. "Name Dove Redmond. Date of death 8 months ago. Cause respiratory failure shortly after birth. Attending physician Dr. Desmond Hewitt." "Your son didn't just try to kill this baby last night," Detective Ashford said, her voice careful. "He's been planning this since the day she was born. He faked her death certificate, erased her from all medical records, and kept her hidden for 8 months before attempting murder." I'd supervised emergency rescues and mining operations for 30 years. I thought I understood desperation. Men trapped underground making terrible choices to survive. I thought I understood evil, the supervisor who ignored safety protocols that got 3 people killed. But this was different. This was patient, methodical. 8 months of living with his daughter, feeding her, maybe even holding her, knowing every day he would eventually kill her. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would he do this?" Detective Ashford's expression told me she had an answer, but not one I would want to hear. I sat in that sterile conference room staring at 2 pieces of paper, a DNA test proving Dove was my granddaughter and a death certificate proving my son had been planning her murder since birth, and I couldn't answer the only question that mattered. Why? Why would Merritt go through 8 months of elaborate planning to murder his own infant daughter? What could possibly justify that level of calculation, that depth of evil? Detective Ashford closed the folder. "We need to talk about your son's finances," she said, "and his wife's family trust." 2 hours later, I sat across from Detective Ashford at the Lake County Sheriff's Office while she spread 3 financial documents across her desk, like a dealer laying out cards that would reveal a losing hand. "Your daughter-in-law's family has a $12 million trust," she said, her voice flat with the kind of practiced neutrality that comes from delivering terrible news professionally. "And your son is the sole beneficiary if both his wife and child are dead." I stared at the papers, legal language dense paragraphs, but the numbers were clear enough. $12 million. Not a fortune by some standards, not tech billionaire money or old oil wealth, but substantial, life-changing, apparently worth killing for. "The Lockwood family established the trust 15 years ago," Detective Ashford continued, pointing to a highlighted section. "Saskia's parents, her grandparents' old East Coast money from banking and real estate. The terms are explicit. If Saskia and any children are alive, the assets remain under family trustees' control. Saskia receives distributions but can't access the principal. But if both Saskia and all children die, the entire amount transfers to the surviving spouse." "Merritt inherits everything," I said. "Everything. $12 million liquid immediately available." She pulled out a second document. "And here's the will Merritt had drawn up 3 months after Dove's birth. Very specific language about what he'd do with inheritance funds, investment strategies, asset diversification, retirement planning. He was already spending it in his mind." I felt something cold settle in my chest, colder than the river water I'd swum through 2 nights ago. This wasn't rage or madness or temporary insanity. This was spreadsheets, calculations. A man sitting at a desk doing math and deciding that his wife's life plus his infant daughter's life equaled $12 million and $12 million was the better option. So he faked Dove's death certificate. I said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. Made it look like she died at birth, then kept her hidden for 8 months while he figured out how to kill Saskia and make it look natural. When Saskia disappeared 4 months ago, "We believe that's when he killed her," Detective Ashford said. "We're searching now, but with Saskia legally missing and Dove legally dead, all he had to do was wait out the timeline, file for death in absentia, and collect." "Except Dove was still alive," I said, "and he couldn't file for inheritance while she was breathing, so he waited 8 months long enough for any pregnancy complication story to be believable and then tried to drown her in a safe. That's our working theory. And my son wanted $12 million more than he wanted his daughter alive." "There's more," Detective Ashford said. She pulled up her laptop, turned it toward me. "Watch." The local news filled the screen, and there was Merritt again sitting in a television studio wearing a different suit, charcoal gray, this time with a burgundy tie, looking earnest and broken and desperate. "I'm offering $50,000 to anyone with information about Saskia's disappearance," he said, his voice catching at exactly the right moment. "I just want Saskia home. Our family needs closure." The interviewer leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "That's a substantial reward." "My wife is worth more than any amount of money," Merritt said. "If this helps bring her home, it's worth every penny." Detective Ashford paused the video. "This aired 3 hours ago, his 5th television appearance this month, and here's what we found." She pulled up bank records, highlighted transactions that made my stomach turn. Polson Media Solutions Crisis, PR and Reputation Management. Monthly retainer, $15,000. First payment dated 6 months ago, right after Saskia disappeared. 3 months paid up front. $45,000 to manufacture sympathy. 3 separate contracts with local lifestyle bloggers and influencers. $500 per supportive post. Minimum 2 posts per week. Terms specifying exact hashtags. Emotional tone requirements, suggested phrasing. Social media advertising budget, $8,000 for promoted posts amplifying Merritt's story targeting Montana residents aged 35 to 65. "He's not grieving," I said, my voice hollow. "He's running a marketing campaign. A very effective one," Detective Ashford said. "The entire city is crying with him. Every sympathetic comment, every shared post, every prayer group meeting, all of it built on a foundation he paid for." I thought about the television interviews I'd watched, the way I'd studied Merritt's face, looking for signs of genuine emotion. I'd seen the performance. What I hadn't seen was the machinery behind it, the PR firm coaching him on emotional beats, the bloggers spreading manufactured narratives, the advertising budget ensuring his face appeared in every social media feed across the county. My granddaughter was fighting for her life in an ICU, her mother was probably dead in a shallow grave somewhere, and her father was on television performing grief he'd bought and paid for with money from the trust he was trying to steal. I'd supervised emergency operations for 30 years, watched men risk their lives to save strangers, seen the genuine gratitude of families we'd pulled from disaster. Some of them sent me cards on my birthday years later, invited me to their children's graduations, remembered my name decades after I'd helped them. And none of them, not one, had ever performed gratitude the way Merritt was performing grief. "What happens now?" I asked. "We build a case," Detective Ashford said. "The fake death certificate, the financial motive, your eyewitness testimony. But we need to find Saskia's body, and we need to prove Merritt knew Dove was alive when he threw that safe." "He knew," I said. "He fed her for 8 months. You don't feed a corpse." She nodded, closed the laptop. "Go home, Mr. Redmond. Get some rest. We'll call when we have updates." I drove home to my empty house overlooking Flathead Lake as sunset turned the water orange and gold. I sat on my porch with cold coffee and my army green thermos and thought about how thoroughly Merritt had planned this: the trust research, the PR campaign, the fake death certificate, 8 months of preparation while feeding his daughter and planning her murder. And then a thought cut through me like ice. If he'd been planning Dove's murder for 8 months and Saskia had disappeared 4 months ago, how long had he been planning to kill me, and why exactly had my heart medication stopped working 3 months ago? That question haunted me through the night. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Dr. Garrison's voice was professionally calm in the way doctors use when delivering very bad news. "Calvin, I need you to bring in all your heart medication bottles immediately. The chemical analysis came back and we have a serious problem." An hour later, I sat in her clinic examination room while she laid 3 pill bottles on the counter like evidence at a crime scene. 2 orange prescription bottles and 1 white one, all from the same pharmacy, all filled within the past 4 months. "These 2, she said, pointing to the orange bottles, "have been tampered with. Someone opened them, replaced the contents with pills containing only 15% active ingredient mixed with harmless filler, then resealed them perfectly. We wouldn't have caught it without chemical analysis." I stared at the bottles. They looked normal. The safety seals were intact. The labels matched my prescriptions exactly. "How?" I asked. "How do you reseal prescription bottles so perfectly that—" "Practice," Dr. Garrison said. "Equipment, possibly professional help. Someone with access to your home went to considerable effort. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned." My chest felt tight, but this time I knew it wasn't anxiety. It was rage. "How long?" I asked. "If I'd kept taking these, how long until—" 3, maybe 4 months. You'd have suffered increasing chest pain, shortness of breath, reduced stamina, eventually cardiac arrest. It would look exactly like end-stage heart disease." She met my eyes. "No autopsy would detect foul play. Your medical history would explain everything." I thought about the chest pain that had woken me at 1:47 a.m. 4 days ago, the tightness I'd felt for weeks. I'd thought my condition was worsening naturally. I'd been wrong. My son hadn't just wanted to kill his daughter and his wife, he'd wanted to kill me too. And he'd started long before that night on the bridge. "The 3rd bottle," I asked, pointing to the white one. "Clean? Full strength?" "That's interesting, actually. It suggests whoever did this wanted some of your medication to work, probably to avoid raising suspicion too quickly. A gradual decline is more believable than sudden deterioration." "Methodical," I said. "Very." I drove home with the untampered medication and sat on my porch overlooking the lake, trying to process the arithmetic of my son's planning. Kill Dove, 8 months of preparation. Kill Saskia, at least 4 months. Kill me started at least 3 months ago, judging from when my chest pain began. You might think discovering your son is trying to murder you would be the worst moment of your life. But I'll tell you what's worse: realizing you helped create the person who wants you dead. That night, I lay in bed in the darkness of my empty house and let myself remember the thing I'd spent 19 years trying to forget. It was January, 3 years after Elena died, when the police called at 11:47 p.m. Merritt, 19 years old, had been driving drunk on Highway 93, the same road that crossed Polson Bridge, and hit a pedestrian. Hadley Fulton, 17 years old, high school senior, walking home from her friend's house because her car wouldn't start. Merritt had been doing 60 in a 35-zone blood alcohol, twice the legal limit, and he'd hit her so hard the impact threw her 15 feet. I'd gotten to the hospital before her parents, stood there watching doctors work, listening to words like shattered pelvis and multiple fractures and permanent mobility impairment. 3 surgeries over 6 months, physical therapy for a year. She'd never run again, never walk without pain, never play the soccer that had earned her a college scholarship she could no longer use. Merritt faced vehicular assault charges, 5 to 15 years in state prison if convicted. I sold our house. The first house Elena and I had saved 5 years to buy the one with the big kitchen where she'd planned to teach grandchildren how to bake bread. It sold for $82,000. I spent $60,000 on the most expensive criminal defense attorney in Montana, a man who specialized in making problems disappear for people who could afford it. Merritt walked out of court with probation, 500 hours of community service, a suspended license, and my repeated assurances that it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes, that we'd get through this together. I moved into that apartment downtown, the one with thin walls where I could hear neighbors arguing through the bathroom vent, and I told myself I'd save my son. What I'd actually done was teach Merritt his first and most dangerous lesson: money erases consequences, and Dad will always fix it. I lay there in the dark, 56 years old, thinking about Hadley Fulton, 36 now, somewhere in Montana, maybe married, maybe with children of her own, walking with a permanent limp because my 19-year-old son got drunk and I had enough money to make the criminal justice system blink. I didn't create the monster, but I taught it that monsters can buy their way out of cages. Elena had argued against hiring the expensive lawyer. She'd said Merritt needed to face real consequences, learn that actions matter, understand that being sorry isn't enough when you've destroyed someone's life. I'd told her she didn't understand that prison would ruin him, that he was just a kid who made a mistake. She'd been dead 3 months when the accident happened, so she never got to say "I told you so," never got to see what 19 years of consequence-free living turned our son into. A man who valued his family's lives at $12 million. A man who would fake his daughter's death certificate and feed her for 8 months while planning her murder. A man who would poison his father's medication while performing grief on television. I lay in the darkness, listening to wind move through ponderosa pines, and understood something terrible. I'd spent 3 decades supervising emergency operations to save people, and the one person I'd actually destroyed was my own son. Not by neglecting him, by protecting him too well. And now that son was killing his family for money while performing grief he'd purchased with a PR firm. The question wasn't whether I could stop him. The question was whether I had the courage to destroy what I'd spent 60 years building, the lie that Merritt Redmond was anything other than what I'd made him. A man who believed money could buy him out of any cage, including the one called murder. I would watch him perform again. And I would begin planning how to tear down every lie, starting with my own. The next morning, I stopped building lies and started collecting evidence, which is how I ended up standing on the sidewalk outside Lakeside Bistro in downtown Polson, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as my son, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my truck payment, performed grief for a room full of reporters and cameras. Merritt sat at a corner table surrounded by his PR team, 3 local reporters and 2 lifestyle bloggers whose sympathetic posts I'd read online. He held up a wedding photo with Saskia's face angled strategically away from the camera. Smart. Harder for witnesses to identify her, or harder to confirm if her body turned up somewhere. His voice carried through the glass, perfectly modulated. "I just want answers," he said. "I want my wife home. Whatever happened, wherever she is, I need to know." The pause before "I need to know" lasted exactly 3 seconds. The same pause I'd heard him rehearse before business presentations in our kitchen years ago, timing his delivery for maximum impact. His hand trembled when he touched the photo frame. Just enough, not too much. I'd taught him by example that if you perform sincerity well enough, people believe it. The monster I created doesn't improvise grief. It perfects it. My phone rang. Detective Ashford. "We found something. Come to the office. Now." 20 minutes later, I sat in the conference room staring at a designer handbag on the table, cream-colored leather, subtle gold hardware. "Secondary search of the Redmond house," Detective Ashford said. "Back of a closet." The lining felt wrong. She turned the bag inside out, revealing a carefully restitched seam. From inside, she pulled an iPhone in a protective case. Saskia's phone. She sewed it into the lining. This wasn't random. She planned to leave evidence. The phone had been off for months, preserving the battery. When Detective Ashford powered it on, the lock screen showed a photo of Dove at maybe 2 months old. A security prompt required both passcode and fingerprint. "We got a warrant. Tech team bypassed it an hour ago." She navigated to the voice memos app. One file labeled in all caps, "Emergency only." Saskia's voice filled the conference room. Clear, steady, unnervingly calm. "If I disappear and you hear this, don't trust Merritt. I know what he's planning. Everything you need to prove it is in folder V. The password is Dove's birth date, month, day, year, no spaces. If you're hearing this, I'm either dead or he's locked me somewhere. Either way, don't let him get away with it. Protect Dove." Silence except for the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "She knew," I said. "Months before it happened, she knew, and she built an insurance policy. Look at the recording date." Detective Ashford showed me the phone. The file was created 6 months ago, February, when Dove was only 2 months old. I'd never truly met Saskia. Merritt had kept her away from me after one awkward dinner 3 years ago. But listening to her voice, hearing the resolve in those words, I understood she'd been braver than anyone in this story, including me. She'd lived with a man who planned to murder her, and instead of running, she'd stayed to build the case that would destroy him. Folder 5 is separately password protected, Detective Ashford said. Tech team hasn't cracked it yet. Dove's birth date, I said. She told us in the recording. We don't have the birth certificate. Dove was declared dead at birth, remember? February 20th, 2024, I said. I checked hospital records after we found her. Try 022022024. Detective Ashford typed. The folder unlocked. Dozens of files populated the screen. Documents, photos, audio recordings, video files. A woman's entire investigation preserved and waiting. Whatever's in here, she risked everything to protect it, I said. Even locked in wherever he kept her, she made sure the truth would survive. Detective Ashford opened the first file. What we found inside folder V would reveal a conspiracy far more elaborate than either of us had imagined. The first file in folder V was a spreadsheet titled Financial Transfers Offshore with 47 rows spanning 18 months, each transaction documented with dates, amounts, routing numbers, and a running total at the bottom $2,347,000. $2.3 million, Detective Ashford said, routed through Cayman Islands accounts. Saskia tracked every transaction. The second file was an email thread. Screenshots showing correspondence between Merritt and someone using the handle DS. Subject lines, medical record access, birth certificate protocol, database deletion confirmation. The third file was a video. 3 minutes long, timestamp 6 months ago. Detective Ashford pressed play. Merritt sat at his home office desk. I recognized the leather chair, the bookshelf behind him. He was on his phone back partially to camera. That girl shouldn't have been born, he said. I don't care how you do it. Just make sure there's no trail. Call me when it's done. He hung up, checked his computer, walked out of frame. The video ended. The fourth file was a Word document, 14 pages. A chronological record of everything Saskia had observed. Dates, times, conversations, transactions. February 20th, 2024. Baby born. M refused to hold her. Said, this complicates everything. March 3rd, 2024. Overheard M on phone. Death certificate can be backdated if price is right. March 14th, 2024. Followed M to warehouse on Kerr Dam Road. Stayed 2 hours. April 8th, 2024. Found M's laptop open. Offshore account balance $2.1 million. This is an amateur hour, Detective Ashford said. Saskia installed keyloggers, tracked accounts, recorded conversations. She investigated like a forensic accountant. She lived with him for months knowing he was planning to kill her and their daughter, I said. And instead of running, she built a case. I'd wondered why Merritt never brought Saskia to family dinners after that first awkward meeting. Now I understood he was afraid of what she'd figured out. Afraid she'd tell me what he really was. Detective Ashford made 3 phone calls. Tech Team District Attorney Missoula Police. 6 hours later, I sat behind one-way glass watching Atlas Newell 29 wearing a gray hoodie slouched in the interrogation chair while Detective Ashford spread printouts across the table. Atlas Newell, freelance security consultant, she said, specializing in digital identity erasure. Atlas stared at the emails. Those are encrypted. You can't... Saskia Lockwood gave us the decryption keys, Detective Ashford said. Every email between you and Merritt Redmond. $85,000 over 3 payments. What were you paid to do? 15 seconds of silence. Then Atlas slumped. I'm a contractor, he said. Client pays, I deliver. I didn't know it was a baby he was erasing. I thought witness protection or something. You erased an 8-month-old from existence for $85,000, Detective Ashford said. Hospital databases, vital records, immunization registry, Social Security. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want to know. Who signed the death certificate? She continued. Give me a name and maybe the prosecutor goes easier. Atlas rubbed his face. Dr. Desmond Hewitt, private physician. Merritt said they had an arrangement. I sat behind the glass thinking about how many people it takes to enable evil. Not just the person committing it, but the contractors who take money and don't ask questions. $85,000 to delete a baby from every database. Evil doesn't always look like monsters. Sometimes it looks like freelancers taking contracts. Back in the conference room, Detective Ashford returned to Saskia's dossier. Page 9. A notation, Kerr Dam Road Warehouse, MR 14/32 hours, followed by GPS coordinates. Kerr Dam Road, she said, pulling up a map. 3 miles outside Polson. She made a call, waited, nodded. Security footage shows Merritt's Range Rover at an abandoned fish cannery on Kerr Dam Road for 47 minutes on March 14th, she said. 4 months ago, right before Saskia vanished. Property records showed the facility closed for 3 years. Owned by a Delaware shell corporation, lease paid in cash keys held by someone named Brent Sinclair. The building has insulated storage containers, Detective Ashford said, studying satellite imagery. Originally for fish storage. If he's keeping her there, she's been locked in a refrigerated warehouse for 4 months, I finished. 4 months. If you've never been imprisoned, you can't imagine how long 4 months is when you're locked in darkness, wondering if anyone will find you. We were about to discover if Saskia Lockwood had survived that long. Detective Ashford called the tactical team, pulling up blueprints on her screen. I watched her face, saw professional calm masking the same fear I felt. We'd found where Merritt had hidden Saskia. The dossier she'd built, the evidence she'd collected, the phone she'd sewn into a handbag, all of it had led us here. The question was whether we'd found it 4 months too late, or if somewhere in that abandoned building my daughter-in-law was still alive, still waiting, still hoping someone would read the evidence she'd risked everything to create. Tactical team assembles at 0400, Detective Ashford said. We breach at dawn. Dawn. 6 hours away. 6 hours to wonder if Saskia Lockwood was counting days in the dark or if those days had already run out. The battering ram hit the rusted cannery door at 6:47 a.m. on day 9. I followed the tactical team into darkness that smelled of old fish rust and something else, something human and desperate that had been trapped inside for 112 days. Flashlights swept the main floor, empty processing tables, rusted conveyor belts, broken windows letting in gray dawn light. The team moved with practiced efficiency, calling clear as they advanced deeper into the building. The storage area was in back, 4 interconnected rooms, each colder than the last. In the last room we found the shipping container, steel, industrial, 8 feet by 10 feet. A small electric heater hummed just enough to keep temperatures above freezing, nowhere near comfort. Commercial padlock. Bolt cutters required. Saskia Lockwood, Detective Ashford called through the metal. Lake County Sheriff, can you hear me? Silence, then scraping. Movement. The bolt cutters made quick work. 2 officers pulled the door open. Saskia Lockwood sat against the far wall. 34 years old, though imprisonment had aged her. Pale skin that hadn't seen sunlight since March. Dark hair matted. A dirty sweater that might have been cream-colored once. Her eyes took a moment to adjust to the flashlight beams. Carved into the metal walls around her, scratched with a nail or scrap metal, Day 47, Day 89, Day 112, Dove alive, don't trust him. She'd counted every day, and those 2 words, Dove alive, told me she'd heard something that kept her fighting. You're safe now, Detective Ashford said, kneeling outside the container. We found your phone. We found folder V. We know everything. Saskia stared. Then tears started sliding down her face, silent, like she'd forgotten how to make sound. Dove, she whispered, her voice raw from disuse. Is Dove alive? I heard her crying through the ventilation shaft. I heard her that night. I stepped into the light where she could see me. I'm Calvin Redmond, Merritt's father. I pulled Dove from the river 8 days ago. She's alive. She's stable. She's going to be okay. Saskia closed her eyes. Her hands shook. She'd been here that night, locked in this container, hearing her daughter crying somewhere beyond these walls, unable to do anything but scratch 2 words into metal and pray. Paramedics moved in with blankets and a stretcher. I stood looking at those carved messages, understanding that my daughter-in-law had spent 112 days in a steel box, counting time, holding on to hope with both hands. The next day, I sat beside her hospital bed while Detective Ashford took her statement. Color had returned to Saskia's face. Her eyes were sharp and determined. I discovered the emails in March, she said. Merritt was asking someone how to erase birth records. I knew what he was planning even before Dove was born. So I installed a keylogger, backed everything to secure cloud storage with a dead man's switch. If I didn't enter my password every 48 hours, the system would automatically send everything to 12 recipients. FBI Field Office, Montana Attorney General, 3 media outlets, family attorneys. That's why he kept you alive, I said. The only reason, she confirmed, he needed me entering that password while he tried to break my encryption. Every 2 days, he'd bring a laptop, watch me log in for 45 minutes, then leave me there again. Think about what that takes, discovering your husband plans to murder you and your infant daughter, and instead of running, staying to build the evidence that will destroy him. Setting up systems so sophisticated that even imprisonment couldn't stop them from working. Saskia looked at me across the hospital bed. Calvin, you need to be careful. Merritt tried to poison you too. I saw medication bottles in the trash with holes in the seals. He was on the phone talking about making it look natural. She'd known, documented it, and now that she was free and talking, every secret Merritt had buried was surfacing. The question was how he'd react when he realized his empire of lies was collapsing. We were about to find out. Merritt's reaction came faster than we expected, but it didn't come from panic. It came from calculation. Leland Travers called Detective Ashford at 9:15 a.m. on day 11, not because we'd tracked him down, not because we'd threatened him with charges, but because his 63-year-old conscience had finally grown heavier than his 40-year reputation. We met him at his law office in downtown Polson. Walnut-paneled walls, leather-bound books, the kind of practiced elegance that comes from decades of serving wealthy clients who pay for discretion above all else. Leland's hands trembled as he poured tea into porcelain cups none of us would drink. 3 weeks before Saskia disappeared, he said, settling into his chair like a man preparing for confession. Merritt came to my office, asked very specific questions about the trust inheritance clause. What happens if Saskia dies before any children? What if both die? What if children are born but die before reaching maturity? Detective Ashford leaned forward. You recognized what he was planning. Yes. Leland's voice was quiet. I've been a trust attorney for 40 years. You learn to hear what clients aren't saying. Merritt wasn't asking theoretical questions. He was building a plan. But you didn't report it, I said. Leland looked at me, old eyes tired, carrying weight. Attorney-client privilege, he said. If I'd gone to police with suspicions based on privileged conversations, I'd have been disbarred, 40 years of reputation gone, so I did something else. He pulled out his phone, navigated to a message thread, showed us a screenshot. I bought a burner phone, he said. Sent Saskia a text, your husband asked dangerous questions about the trust. Be careful, be smart. I hoped she'd understand, that she'd protect herself. When did you send it? Detective Ashford asked. March 7th, 1 week later she was gone. The room went quiet except for the antique clock ticking on Leland's desk. You warned her but didn't save her, I said, my voice flat. You let her disappear because your reputation mattered more than her life. Leland didn't defend himself, just nodded once, accepting the judgment. What do you do when you realize that the people who could have stopped a tragedy chose not to, not because they couldn't, but because it would cost them something they valued more than a stranger's life? You add them to the list of people who failed. The list that included me now because I'd raised the monster in the first place. Leland's confession explained why Saskia had moved so fast. She'd received that anonymous warning March 7th. By March 10th, according to her dossier, she'd installed keyloggers and begun documenting everything. She'd had maybe 3 weeks to build her case before Merritt disappeared her. 3 weeks to create the dead man's switch that would keep her alive. She'd understood immediately that she was running out of time. That evening, Detective Ashford called me to the sheriff's office. She'd pulled security camera footage from Merritt's building luxury penthouse on the 28th floor downtown Polson, the kind of residence that came with doormen and private elevators and cameras covering every hallway. She played the footage on her computer, timestamp 7:30 p.m. Merritt sat at his home office desk, the same desk I'd seen in Saskia's covertly recorded video. He was reading something on his laptop, and even through the grainy security feed, I could see his expression calm, focused, utterly controlled. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. We couldn't hear audio. The camera was in the hallway, aimed at his door, but catching him through the office window. But we could see him talking, see his body language, see the pen he picked up and began tapping against the desk in that rhythmic way he'd had since childhood when he was thinking through problems. The call lasted 4 minutes. He hung up, made notes on a legal pad, then dialed again. 7 minutes. More notes. A third call. 11 minutes this time. 3 calls, Detective Ashford said. We pulled his phone records. First call, Marcus Shaw, his criminal defense attorney. Second call, Dr. Desmond Hewitt. Third call, Brent Sinclair. He's warning them, I said. He's not warning them, he's managing them. She paused the video on Merritt's face. Look at his posture. He's leaning back in that chair pen, tapping the desk. This is the same body language he uses during business negotiations. He's not panicking. He's treating a murder investigation like a corporate crisis that needs damage control. I stared at the frozen image of my son. Calm, methodical, fearless. A scared person runs, I said. A confident person fights. He thinks he can win this. That's what worries me, Detective Ashford said. A frightened criminal makes mistakes, runs to airports, destroys evidence badly, says things they shouldn't. But someone like Merritt, he's calling each accomplice in order of importance, telling them exactly what to do, how to respond, what to say, what not to say. Watching Merritt manage his crisis was like watching a chess grandmaster, 3 moves from checkmate, not panicking, not conceding, just calmly repositioning pieces to turn inevitable loss into stalemate. Detective Ashford played the footage forward. After the third call, Merritt closed his laptop, stood up, walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Flathead Lake. Stood there for maybe 30 seconds, hands in his pockets, looking out at water that had nearly swallowed his daughter 9 days ago. Then he turned, grabbed his jacket, and walked out of frame. "Where'd he go?" I asked. "Building security says he left in his Range Rover at 7:53 p.m., returned at 9:41. No idea where he went." Detective Ashford froze the video on Merritt's face during that third phone call to Brent Sinclair, calm, focused, in control. "We need to arrest the accomplices now," she said, "before he tells them to run or destroy evidence. We have maybe hours, not days, to bring them in before they vanish or turn their cooperation into his final escape route." The race had begun. Merritt was warning his network, moving pieces across the board, and we were scrambling to capture them before they disappeared into his carefully constructed defense. "Dr. Desmond Hewitt first," Detective Ashford said, already reaching for her phone. "He signed the fake death certificate. If anyone can give us the full conspiracy, it's him." They arrested Dr. Desmond Hewitt at his private clinic on day 12 at 7:15 a.m. Four plainclothes officers walking through the waiting room past 3 startled patients, badges out. No dramatics, just quiet efficiency that said this wasn't a surprise raid but a calculated chess move. I watched through one-way glass 2 hours later as Dr. Hewitt sat in the interrogation room with his attorney. 37 years old, silver at his temples despite his age, wearing scrubs like he'd been pulled directly from an examination. His hands were folded on the table, completely still, his face revealing nothing. Detective Ashford entered with a file folder. She didn't sit immediately, just stood there letting the silence build, then began methodically spreading documents across the metal table. First, email screenshots. Merritt to someone with the username DesH56, subject lines about medical documentation and database protocols. Second, bank transfer records. 3 payments totaling $120,000 sent from an offshore account to Dr. Hewitt's personal checking. Third, the death certificate, Dove Redmond. Cause of death, respiratory failure. Time of death, 3:47 a.m., February 20th, 2024. Attending physician signature, Dr. Desmond Hewitt. Dr. Hewitt stared at the certificate. His attorney whispered something. He shook his head. Detective Ashford sat down. "Dr. Hewitt," she said, "you signed a death certificate for a baby who's currently recovering in Providence St. Joseph Medical Center. She's alive. Her name is Dove. She's 8 months old." Silence. Then Dr. Hewitt looked up and his careful professional mask cracked. Is she alive?" His voice broke on the question. "Is the baby alive?" "Yes," Detective Ashford said. "She's recovering. You signed a death certificate for a living child." Dr. Hewitt closed his eyes. Thank God she's alive." His attorney tried to interrupt, but Dr. Hewitt waved him off. "Merritt had evidence of a prescription error I made 2 years ago," he said, the words tumbling out. "Wrong medication, wrong dosage. The patient was hospitalized, recovered, but it was bad. I should have reported it formally, but I didn't. I was afraid of losing my license. Merritt found out I don't know how, and he said he'd expose me unless I helped." "Helped how?" Detective Ashford asked. "The death certificate. He said the baby needed to be erased from records. Said it was a custody thing, that the mother was unstable. He paid me $120,000 and promised to destroy the evidence of my mistake." Dr. Hewitt looked at the certificate again. "I told myself it was just paperwork, that no one was really getting hurt. I was wrong. I'd spent 3 decades coordinating emergency rescues in dangerous situations. Now I was watching a doctor break down because a baby he'd tried to erase from existence turned out to be alive. Sometimes the line between evil and cowardice is thinner than we want to believe." Detective Ashford took his full statement. Dr. Hewitt signed it, was formally charged, and let out in handcuffs. Through the glass I watched him go, a man who'd traded his integrity for money and fear, who'd helped my son commit murder, and who'd cried with relief when he learned the victim survived. "Before I tell you what happened when Merritt called me that night, I need you to do something. Comment A, if you think Merritt will sense the trap, or B, if you think his arrogance will blind him, and add 1 reason why in 10 words or less. Please note what follows includes some recreated details for storytelling purposes, though the core events remain true. Day 13, 11 p.m. My kitchen. I was making coffee in my army green thermos, the same one that had survived 30 years of underground work, when my phone rang. Merritt. First call since the bridge. First contact since I'd watched him throw his daughter into a river. I answered. "Dad?" His voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a son who cared about his father's health. "How are you feeling? I've been worried about you. Haven't heard from you in a couple weeks." No mention of Saskia. No mention of police. No mention of Dove or arrests or the conspiracy collapsing around him. Just a son checking on his aging father. I'm managing, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You sound tired, Merritt said. Are you taking your medication properly? You know how important that is with your heart condition. I looked at my thermos, thought about the medication bottles with holes in the seals, thought about 3 months of chest pain that was actually my son poisoning me. The medication isn't working like it used to, I said, and heard my voice crack slightly. Not performance, but genuine exhaustion from carrying this weight. I'm more tired than I should be, Merritt. More tired than makes sense. Silence on the line. Just 2 seconds, but I could hear the shift. That's concerning, he said, and the relief in his voice was so subtle most people would miss it. But I'd raised him. I knew his tells. Maybe I should come visit this weekend, check on you, make sure you're okay. That would be good, I said. We talked for another 3 minutes. Surface conversation. Weather. His work. Nothing real. Then he said he had to go, told me to rest, said he'd see me Saturday. I hung up and stood there in my dark kitchen understanding exactly what had just happened. Merritt was checking if the poisoning was working, if I was getting weaker, if his plan to murder me was proceeding on schedule. You might think the moment you decide to trap your own son would feel dramatic, like something shattering inside you. But it doesn't. It feels quiet, cold, like flipping a switch from father to victim to hunter. I looked at that thermos, 30 years of rescuing people, of running toward danger instead of away from it, and made my choice. If Merritt wanted to visit his dying father, I'd give him exactly that. I'd play weak, vulnerable, broken enough to be honest with, desperate enough to seek comfort from the son who was killing me. And when he came to check if I was dying on schedule, I'd get him to tell me why. I'd get him to confess. I'd get everything I needed to destroy him. I hung up the phone and stood in my dark kitchen understanding that I'd just crossed a line I could never uncross. I'd told my son I was dying and his relief had been audible. Now I needed to make him believe I was weak enough to confess, to broken enough to trust, dying enough to tell the truth. The next morning, I'd walk into Detective Ashford's office and volunteer to wear a wire. The next morning at 6 a.m., I walked into the Lake County Sheriff's Office carrying 2 cups of coffee and said 5 words that made Detective Ashford's pen stop mid-signature, "I want to wear the microphone." She looked up from her paperwork. The office was empty at this hour, just fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of old coffee mixing with the bitter fresh cups I'd brought. "You want to what?" she said. "Wear a wire," I said, setting 1 coffee cup on her desk. "Get Merritt to confess. It's the only way this works." Detective Ashford leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You understand what you're asking if he suspects for 1 second. Then I'll be in the same danger Saskia was in," I interrupted. "I'm aware of the risk, Detective. I'm also aware it's the only card we have left to play. We have physical evidence, accomplice testimony, financial records, all circumstantial without his confession," I said. "A good defense attorney will tear it apart, say Merritt was manipulated by accomplices, that he didn't know what they were doing, that the money transfers were legitimate business transactions. But if I get him talking, if I get him to tell me why he did it, you'll have everything you need." She picked up her coffee, took a sip, watched me over the rim of the cup. "He'll only confess if he thinks I'm dying," I continued. "A man like Merritt, he doesn't just want to win, he needs me to know he won. He needs to see my face when he tells me how clever he was, how perfectly he planned everything, how I never suspected a thing." "That's a lot of psychological projection," Detective Ashford said. "I raised him for 38 years, I said. "I know how he thinks. He's been waiting his whole life to prove he's smarter than me. This is his chance." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. How would it work? I outlined the plan. I'd stage a medical crisis. Call Merritt, tell him I'm dying, that I need to see him one last time. Position it as a deathbed conversation where he can finally be honest, because what does it matter? His father will be gone soon anyway. "You'd be completely vulnerable," Detective Ashford said. "No backup in the room. Just you and a man who's already tried to kill you once." "I've spent 3 decades in situations where one wrong move meant death," I said. "Underground collapses, gas leaks, structural failures. I know how to assess risk, and I know my son. How do you trap a man who believes he's already won? You give him an audience for his victory." She made 3 phone calls. DA's office, technical unit, her supervisor. An hour later, she came back and said 1 word: approved. She also confirmed that the district attorney had signed an arrest warrant for Merritt Redmond based on existing evidence, financial records, accomplice testimony, the forged death certificate. The moment I pressed the panic button, SWAT would be legally authorized to breach and take him into custody. 24 hours later, day 15, mid-afternoon, her phone rang while we were reviewing wire protocols. She answered, listened, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to focused interest. "Where are you now?" she asked. "Stay there, I'm coming to you." She hung up, looked at me. "Brent Sinclair," she said, "wants to make a deal." 2 hours later, I sat behind one-way glass watching Detective Ashford meet with a man I'd never seen but whose name had appeared in Saskia's dossier. Brent Sinclair. 41 years old, lean and nervous, wearing work boots and a flannel jacket. Owner of Mountain Peak Equipment Rentals in Kalispell. A cardboard box sat on the metal table between them. "I'm not going down for Merritt's revenge fantasy," Brent said, his voice tight. "He blackmailed me into this with photos of illegal dumping from 2014. My company disposed of equipment waste improperly. Could lose my business license, face EPA fines. He said he'd destroy me unless I helped." "Helped how?" Detective Ashford asked. "Logistics. I rented the shipping container under a Shell LLC, provided keys, helped transport it to the cannery." His hands shook slightly as he pushed the box across the table. "But I kept insurance, because I never trusted him." Detective Ashford opened the box, pulled out rental receipts, 3-burner SIM cards still in packaging, a spare key on a simple ring, then a USB drive in a plastic case. "What's on this?" she asked. "Security footage from Merritt's home camera system," Brent said. "March 14th, 3:47 p.m. You'll see exactly who locked that container. I learned something about myself in that fluorescent-lit office. I was capable of using my own grief as bait, capable of walking into danger with my eyes open, capable of watching my son's world collapse piece by piece and feeling nothing but cold satisfaction." Detective Ashford played the USB on her laptop. Grainy security footage. Timestamp March 14th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. Merritt's property. The shipping container visible in frame, and there Merritt himself walking a woman toward it. Saskia. She was struggling, hands bound, but he was stronger. He opened the container, pushed her inside, closed the door, secured the padlock. The footage continued for another 3 minutes. Merritt stood there checking his phone, completely calm. Then he walked out of frame. "That's everything," Brent said. "Rental documentation, communication records, video proof. I want partial immunity and witness protection in exchange for testimony." Detective Ashford closed the laptop. "I'll talk to the DA." That evening my phone rang. Detective Ashford, 3 words that made my chest tighten. "We have everything. The wire, the accomplice testimony, the financial records, and now video footage of Merritt personally imprisoning his wife. The case wasn't just strong anymore. It was ironclad." "Tomorrow morning," Detective Ashford said, "we'll fit you with the equipment, brief you on what to say, how to prompt him. Then you'll make the call." I stood on my porch overlooking Flathead Lake, watching the sun set over water that had nearly swallowed my granddaughter 2 weeks ago, and understood that the trap was set. All that remained was the performance of my life. Convincing Merritt that I was dying vulnerable, broken enough to hear his confession. That the father who'd always protected him was finally weak enough to be honest with. And when he came to gloat over my deathbed, when he told me everything he'd done and why every word would be recorded, every confession preserved, every crime documented. The hunter's trap was ready. All I needed now was the monster to walk into it. The evidence was secured. The trap was designed. Now came the execution. 3 plainclothes officers walked into my kitchen at 4 p.m. carrying a rolled tactical map and a black equipment case that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. The lead officer was Hayes, mid-40s, compact build, the kind of efficient calm that comes from 20 years coordinating dangerous operations. He spread the map across my kitchen table, weighted the corners with coffee mugs, and began marking positions with a red pen. "Your property has 3 approach vectors," he said. "Front drive, lake access, east tree line. We'll have units concealed at each position. Response time from perimeter to interior, 28 seconds. Detective Ashford stood beside me, arms crossed, watching Hayes work with professional assessment. "Worst case scenarios." Hayes continued marking X's on the map. "Subject arrives armed. Subject brings accomplice. Subject refuses to speak and attempts to leave. Your panic signal initiates immediate breach, regardless of confession status. We get you out secure. The subject evidence preservation becomes secondary to your safety." He looked at me. "Clear." "Clear," I said. The second officer opened the equipment case. Inside, nested in foam, was technology I'd never seen outside of movies. Microtransmitters, wireless receivers, a device the size of a USB drive. Tech specialist Rodriguez, maybe 28 sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, pulled on latex gloves, and gestured for me to lift my shirt. "This goes against your sternum," she said, holding up a thin rectangular transmitter. "Medical-grade adhesive, won't come off with sweat or movement. Broadcast range half-mile, battery life 6 hours, more than enough." She positioned the device, pressed it against my chest. The adhesive was cold, then warm as it bonded to skin. "Panic button." She continued, showing me what looked like a car key fob. 3 quick presses, no hesitation, no pattern, just press, press, press. Signal goes to all units simultaneously. You'll hear the breach team within 30 seconds, but you need to buy us that time. Drop cover, protect your head and neck. She handed me the button. Practice. I pressed 3 times. Click, click, click. Again. Click, click, click. 20 times, she said. Muscle memory. When adrenaline hits and rational thought shuts down, your fingers need to know what to do without your brain telling them. I practiced 20 times, until the motion felt automatic, until I could do it blind. Detective Ashford watched me rehearse my own emergency escape protocol, and I saw something in her expression, pity maybe, or respect, or both. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "This is your son." "Exactly because he's my son," I said. "He needs to know I know." What kind of father practices a panic button to escape his own son? The kind who spent 30 years reading danger in unstable rock and bad gas, who learned that survival means acknowledging truth even when truth is unbearable. Especially then. At 5:30 p.m., as the tactical team finished their preparations and moved to staging positions, Detective Ashford sat across from me at the kitchen table with a legal pad covered in notes. "You need specific admissions," she said. "Not just I did it. We need dates, locations, accomplice names. Get him talking about the container first. Physical details, lock him in before motive. Where did he keep Saskia? How did he access the location? Who helped?" "He'll want to start with why," I said. "Merritt always needs the story to make sense, needs to explain his reasoning." "Let him," she said. "Just make sure he circles back to the how. The DA needs concrete admissions, not philosophical justifications." Outside my kitchen window, storm clouds were gathering over Flathead Lake, dark, heavy, moving fast. The kind of November storm that turns the water violent and the air electric. We rehearsed. I practiced making my voice weaker, my posture more defeated. The dying father routine. The man broken enough to hear truth, desperate enough to seek comfort from the son who was killing him. Detective Ashford watched, corrected, refined. "More tremor in your hands," she said. "You're supposed to be weak, scared. Don't perform strength trying to perform weakness." I tried again. Let my shoulders sag. Let my voice crack. "Better," she said. At 6 p.m., she left to coordinate with the tactical units. I stood alone in my kitchen, feeling the transmitter cold against my sternum, and walked through my house one more time. 30 years of living here. 30 years of memories in these walls. Elena's chair by the window. The table where Merritt used to do homework. The porch where I'd watched sunsets and tried to understand where I'd gone wrong as a father. In my bedroom, I opened the closet, pushed past jackets and coats until I found it in back the faded flannel jacket I'd worn 18 years ago. The night I got the call that Merritt, 20 years old and drunk and desperate, was standing on Polson Bridge, threatening to jump. I'd driven there in this jacket, talked him down in this jacket, held him while he cried in this jacket. I pulled it on now. It still fit. Smelled like old cedar and memories. Outside, the storm gathered over Flathead Lake like an audience taking its seats. Same jacket, same man, different ending. I stood at my living room window watching darkness fall, understanding the symmetry of what was about to happen. 18 years ago, I'd saved Merritt's life on a bridge. 2 weeks ago, I'd saved his daughter's life from a river. Tonight, I'd destroy him with the confession he'd been carrying like poison. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Detective Ashford. "He's on the move. ETA to your location, 47 minutes. I checked the panic button in my pocket, felt the transmitter against my chest, put on the old flannel jacket that had been there for the beginning of this story and would be here for the end. Merritt was coming, unaware that every word he spoke would be recorded, unaware that SWAT teams surrounded my property, unaware that his father, the man he'd tried to poison the man he thought was dying on schedule, was actually the trap. I stood in my dark living room and waited for my son to arrive so I could destroy him with the truth he'd been dying to confess. 47 minutes felt like 47 hours. Then headlights swept across my living room window, cutting through darkness and rain. Merritt's Range Rover in my driveway. Engine off, door opening, footsteps on wet gravel. I stood in my dark kitchen flannel jacket zipped to hide the transmitter and watched my son walk toward my door through the storm. The wire was live. SWAT teams were positioned in the tree line. Detective Ashford was listening from a van 200 yards away. Everything was ready. Except me. I wasn't ready. I would never be ready to destroy my own son. But I did it anyway. The knock came. 3 sharp raps. I waited 5 seconds, long enough to seem weak, struggling, then shuffled to the door and opened it. Merritt stood on my porch wearing a black leather jacket that probably cost $2,500, his hair styled like he'd just come from a photo shoot instead of a midnight visit to his dying father. Rain beaded on the expensive leather. His face showed perfect concern. "Dad," he said, and his voice carried exactly the right amount of worry. You sounded terrible on the phone. I came as fast as I could. I stepped back, let him in, closed the door against the storm. The house was dark except for one lamp in the living room, casting everything in dim yellow light and long shadows. "Thanks for coming," I said, keeping my voice weak, letting it shake slightly. "I know it's late. I needed to see you." Merritt followed me into the living room, and I could feel him assessing my unsteady gait, my slumped shoulders, the way I lowered myself carefully into my chair like a man whose body was failing. "You look terrible," he said, sitting on the couch across from me. "The medication's not working." "Nothing's working anymore," I said. "The doctors don't know why. They've tried adjusting the dosage, trying different combinations, but I just keep getting weaker." I watched Merritt process this, watched the micro-expression that flickered across his face, satisfaction quickly masked as sympathy. "That's concerning," he said. "Have they considered it might be something else? Not your heart, but some other condition?" "They've run tests," I said. "Everything comes back showing my heart disease is progressing. Like something's, I don't know, accelerating it." Another flicker. This one lasted longer, relief trying to look like concern. I was 56 years old and acting for my life, every tremor in my voice, a choice, every weakened step, a lie. The wire transmitter was cold against my sternum, recording everything, and I had to keep performing weakness while my hands wanted to reach for the panic button in my pocket and end this before it began. But I needed the confession first. "Merritt," I said, letting my voice break, "I need to ask you something before it's too late." "Anything, Dad." "Dove," I said, "why did you do that to Dove?" The room went quiet except for rain hammering the roof and wind rattling the windows. Merritt stared at me. For 3 seconds, his mask stayed perfect confusion, concern not understanding the question. Then it cracked, and he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable deflection, a genuine laugh of pure relief. "Finally," he said, leaning back on my couch, spreading his arms across the cushions like a man who'd just won something important. "God, it's been exhausting pretending I don't know that you know. You deserve to hear the truth." My son looked happy. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, Merritt looked genuinely, authentically happy. Not the performed emotion he showed cameras and reporters. Not the calculated warmth he used on business calls. Real happiness, because he finally got to tell me what he'd done. "How did you figure it out?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The bridge? Did someone see me?" "I saw you," I said. "I was there that night. I saw you throw the safe into the river." Merritt nodded like I'd just confirmed a minor detail in a business transaction. "I wondered if those headlights I saw were yours. You've always had this annoying habit of driving around when you can't sleep." "I pulled her out," I said. "Dove. I pulled her out of the river. She's alive." Something shifted in Merritt's expression. Not guilt, not remorse, irritation. "That's unfortunate," he said. "Not for her, I'm sure she's very grateful to her heroic grandfather. But unfortunate for me. That complicates the inheritance timeline significantly." He said it the way someone might complain about traffic or bad weather. Minor inconvenience. Nothing more. "The medication you've been taking," Merritt continued, standing up, walking to my kitchen like he owned it, opening my refrigerator and pulling out a beer. "I had those pills replaced about 4 months ago, not with poison that would show up in autopsy, just with pills that look identical, but contain about 15% of the active ingredient. Your heart disease progresses naturally. You die naturally. No one suspects anything." He twisted the cap off the beer, took a long drink, leaned against my kitchen counter. "I planned this for almost a year," he said. "Every detail, every contingency. Saskia was the hardest part. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. Found evidence built that dossier set up her little dead man's switch. Very clever, but I've been managing it." "Where is she?" I asked. "Safe," Merritt said. "Relatively speaking. Alive anyway. For now. She's useful as long as she keeps entering that password every 48 hours. Once I break her encryption, she becomes less necessary." My hands gripped the arms of my chair. The panic button was in my pocket. 3 quick presses. But I needed more. I needed all of it. Merritt stepped closer, beer in hand, expensive cologne mixing with the smell of rain and old flannel. "It started the night you saved me from that bridge," he said. 18 years ago. The night you decided I owed you my life. Do you remember what you told me after you talked me down?" I remembered. I'd said, "You're my son. I'd do anything for you." "You said I owed you," Merritt continued. "Not in those words, but in every action afterward. Every time you reminded me you'd saved my life, every time you treated my successes like they were yours because you'd kept me alive to achieve them." The wire transmitter burned cold against my chest as I prepared to hear exactly how my son had destroyed everything I loved. And somewhere in the darkness, outside SWAT teams waited for my signal, while Merritt Redmond finally, after months of careful planning, told his father the truth he'd been dying to confess. You never understood that saving someone's life means you own the narrative forever. Merritt said, his voice carrying the same casual tone he used ordering coffee. Every time someone asked about my success, you'd tell the bridge story. Remember, I pulled him back from the edge, like everything I built afterward was only possible because you'd kept me alive. He took another drink of beer, completely relaxed, like we were discussing weather instead of murder. I was always just the son you rescued, he continued. Not Merritt the entrepreneur, not Merritt who built a portfolio worth $40 million, just the kid who would have died without Dad's intervention. That's the narrative you created. That's what I spent 18 years resenting. The wire transmitter recorded every word. SWAT teams waited in darkness, and I sat in my chair performing weakness, letting him talk. When Saskia announced the pregnancy, Merritt said, I had 18 months before the baby invalidated the inheritance clause. 18 months to restructure everything, liquidate what I could, position the trust assets for maximum efficiency. He spoke like he was presenting a quarterly report, numbers, timelines, risk assessment. She found the emails about the trust transfers in March, he continued, left her laptop open stupidly, saw correspondence between me and the trust attorney, started asking questions. I couldn't have her talking to you or anyone else, so I improvised. The container, I said, keeping my voice weak. Container rental through a Shell LLC, isolated location, burner phones for coordination, standard risk mitigation. He said it like he was describing warehouse inventory management, not human imprisonment. I kept her alive because of her dead man's switch, clever woman, I'll give her that. The baby I kept alive for exactly 8 months because killing her immediately would have triggered the trust's invalidation clause. Had to wait until the legal timeline allowed. I stood 3 feet from my son while he described imprisoning my daughter-in-law like filing quarterly taxes, and I couldn't let my face move, couldn't let rage show, couldn't let him see that every word was being recorded. Your medication, Merritt said, walking to my kitchen window looking out at the storm. I replaced that about 3 months ago. You started asking inconvenient questions about Saskia's disappearance. Wanted to know if I'd checked with her family, if I'd hired investigators. Couldn't risk you actually investigating, so I accelerated your timeline. He turned back to me, beer bottle catching the dim lamplight. Not poison, he said, just pills with 15% of the active ingredient. Your heart disease progresses naturally. You die naturally. Estate passes to me as your sole heir. Combined with Saskia's trust inheritance, I'd be looking at about 54 million liquid within 18 months. 54 million. He'd calculated it down to the exact figure. His wife's life, his daughter's life, his father's life, all converted to precise dollar amounts in his mind. I hired help, obviously, Merritt continued. Brent Sinclair handled equipment logistics. Atlas Newell managed the digital erasure, very thorough work, actually erasing Dove from every database. Dr. Hewitt provided medical documentation. All contractors, all compensated appropriately, all with leverage to ensure silence. He finished his beer, set the bottle on my kitchen counter with a soft clink. The truth is, Dad, I've never loved anyone. Not Saskia, not Dove, not you. Love is just an emotional liability that clouds financial decision-making. People are instruments. You use them for specific purposes, and when they stop serving those purposes, you divest. He killed his mother when he was 20 years old. The thought hit me before he said the words, but I knew what was coming. I could see it in his face, the final revelation he'd been building toward, the truth he'd been carrying for 18 years. Mom's accident, Merritt said, and his voice didn't change at all. The brake lines. That was me. You were talking about trying for another baby. I was 20 years old, home from college for the summer, and I overheard you and Mom discussing it. Another child meant dilution, meant splitting what should have been entirely mine. My chest felt like it was collapsing. Elena, my wife, Merritt's mother, dead for 18 years because our 20-year-old son had understood dilution mathematics. It wasn't complicated, Merritt said. Brake fluid reservoir, simple puncture, slow leak. She made it 3 miles before the brakes failed completely. Investigators called it mechanical failure. You never suspected. No one suspected. He walked closer and I could smell his expensive cologne mixing with beer and rain. That's when I learned the fundamental truth, he said. If you're smart enough and patient enough, you can get away with anything. It's just a matter of planning and execution. My hands gripped the chair arms. The panic button in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. So, now you know, Merritt said, and he smiled, genuinely smiled. I win. You saved my life on that bridge 18 years ago, and I've spent every year since destroying yours, piece by piece, person by person, and you never saw it coming. Even now, sitting there dying from the medication I replaced, you're just trying to understand why." He laughed. "The why is simple, Dad. $54 million, that's the why. That's always been the why." My hand moved to my pocket, found the panic button, cold plastic against my fingers. "I have one question," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "What's that? Did you ever for even one moment feel anything for any of us?" Merritt considered this, really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "Not once. Does that make me a monster in your eyes?" I pressed the button 3 times, click, click, click. "No," I said, "it makes you arrested." Merritt's expression didn't change immediately. Confusion flickered across his face just for a second as he processed my words. Then understanding hit. His eyes dropped to my chest where the transmitter was hidden under my flannel jacket. Then to my pocket where I'd just pressed the panic button. "You're wearing a wire," he said, his voice flat. Outside I heard vehicles moving. 30 seconds. That's what they'd promised. 30 seconds from signal to breach. "Everything you said was recorded," I told him. "Every confession, every crime, every murder. Detective Ashford has been listening from the beginning. SWAT teams are surrounding the house right now." Merritt stared at me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his mask cracked completely. "You set me up," he said. "I trapped you," I corrected, "with the truth you were dying to tell me." The wire pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Merritt stared at me, his expression shifting from relief to confusion to something sharper. His hand froze halfway to his phone. "What did you just say?" His voice dropped an octave. I pulled the flannel jacket open. The microtransmitter sat clipped to my undershirt, a black square no bigger than a matchbox, its tiny red light blinking in the dim room. I said, "I'm wearing a wire. Every word you just told me about Elena, about Saskia, about Dove, about the medication, they heard it all." Merritt's face went white, then red, then white again. He took a step back, then forward, like his body couldn't decide whether to run or attack. "You..." His mouth worked soundlessly. "You set me up. I trapped you," I said, "the way you trapped Saskia, the way you tried to trap me with the poison pills." He lunged. I pressed the panic button 3 times, the sequence SWAT officer Hayes had made me practice 20 times in the van. 1, 2, 3. Sharp, deliberate. The countdown started in my head. 30 seconds, Hayes had said. Maybe less if things go wrong. Merritt's hands closed around my throat. I didn't fight back. Couldn't. My knee buckled and we went down together, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. His thumbs dug into my windpipe. "You think you're so fucking righteous," he hissed, spit flecking my face. "You saved me from that bridge so you could feel like a hero. You enabled me for 19 years so you wouldn't have to admit what I was. And now you get to be the hero again, don't you? The father who caught his monster son." Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. 20 seconds. Maybe 15. "You made me," Merritt said, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since he was 12. "You taught me that consequences were negotiable, that money fixed everything, that if I just looked sorry enough you'd..." The front door exploded inward. Police hands. SWAT flooded the room in a wave of black tactical gear and red laser sights. Hayes reached us first, hauling Merritt off me with enough force to slam him face first into the hardwood. Another officer, Rodriguez, the tech specialist who'd fitted my wire, dragged me backward, checking my neck with gloved hands. "I'm okay," I gasped. "I'm okay." Merritt screamed into the floor as they cuffed him. Not words, just rage, raw and animal. 2 officers hauled him upright. His nose was bleeding. His gray eyes found mine across the room, and for one terrible second, I saw the boy who'd stood on the bridge railing 18 years ago, the boy who'd said, "I can't do this anymore, Dad," before I talked him down. What if I'd let him jump? How many people would still be alive? Detective Ashford stepped through the shattered doorframe phone pressed to his ear. He looked at me, at Merritt, at the overturned furniture and the wire still blinking on my chest. He ended his call. "We got it all. Clean recording, no gaps. Confession to 4 attempted murders. 1 successful murder, kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy." He nodded at the officers holding Merritt. "Read him his rights. Transport him to county. Isolation cell." "You're dead," Merritt said to me as they dragged him toward the door. His voice was flat, now empty. "You hear me? You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." "Merritt Redmond," one of the officers began, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The rest disappeared into the storm as they hauled him outside. Through the broken door, I watched red and blue lights paint the rain-slicked driveway. Neighbors stood on their porches in bathrobes, phones out recording. Tomorrow, this would be everywhere. Local engineer traps son in murder confession. Wire recording captures admission of decades-old matricide. Rodriguez unclipped the transmitter from my shirt. You did good, Mr. Redmond. That took guts. Did it? Or did it just take 19 years of cowardice finally running out? Ashford approached, stepping over broken door hinges. Paramedics are outside. Let them check your throat. He paused. You'll need to testify. The trial starts in 90 days. Defense will argue entrapment, coercion, diminished capacity. They'll put you on the stand and ask why you didn't just call us the moment you suspected. Why you wore a wire instead of trusting the system. I don't know if I have an answer to that. Find one. She handed me a business card, her direct line cell number scrawled on the back in pen. Prosecutor will want to prep you next week. For now, go see your granddaughter. Saskia has been asking about you. The SWAT team filed out. Hayes clapped my shoulder on his way past. The house fell silent except for the rain hammering the roof and the distant wail of sirens fading toward the highway. I sat on the couch, the same couch where Merritt had just confessed to killing his mother, and stared at the microtransmitter in my palm. This tiny piece of metal and wire had caught a monster. My son. My responsibility. The hardest part wasn't the trap. It was living with what I'd caught. 8 weeks after the warehouse, I sat in Lake County Courthouse Row 3 and watched Prosecutor Daniel Reeves, the lead attorney for the District Attorney's Office, press play on the audio recording of my son confessing to murdering his mother. The car had been junked 18 years ago, and Elena's case had been closed as mechanical failure. But the recorded confession, Merritt's own voice captured on federal wire evidence, was sufficient for the DA to bring the charge. Montana law allows prosecution based on a defendant's direct admission, even when physical evidence no longer exists. The courtroom went silent. 200 people held their breath as Merritt's voice filled the space, tinny through the speakers but unmistakable. I cut the brake lines when I was 20. She died 3 hours later at the bottom of Crescent Ridge. You were talking about trying for another baby. I already understood dilution mathematics. I kept my eyes forward, didn't look at the jury, didn't look at Merritt sitting at the defense table in his pressed suit. Just stared at the wood grain of the bench in front of me and listened to my son describe 18 years of premeditated evil like he was reading a quarterly earnings report. Judge Margaret Callahan, a 30-year veteran of the Lake County Superior Court bench, watched the jury's faces with the careful attention of someone who'd seen 1,000 verdicts. She was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. When the recording ended, Merritt's final words still hanging in the air, "I never loved any of them." She nodded once to Reeves. "Call your next witness." Saskia took the stand. She'd gained weight since the container, color back in her cheeks. But her hands shook when she placed them on the Bible and her voice wavered on the oath. Detective Simone Ashford sat in the front row, stone-faced and taking notes. She'd spent 3 months building this case. Every piece of evidence cataloged, every witness prepped. "Ms. Lockwood," Reeves said gently, "can you describe the 19 days you spent imprisoned?" Saskia looked at Merritt. He stared back with no expression, like she was a stranger. "I counted days by the light through the container's ventilation holes," she said. 19 mornings, 19 nights wondering if Dove would remember me, if she'd grow up thinking I abandoned her. The jury leaned forward. 3 women in the front row had tissues out. "Did the defendant visit you during those 19 days?" "Twice. Once to bring water. Once to tell me his father was dying and soon it would all be over." Her voice steadied. He said it like he was discussing weather, clinical, detached. Reeves nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Lockwood." The accomplices came next. Dr. Desmond Hewitt testified first. He was 37, a private physician who'd lost his license 3 months prior. Thin face, nervous hands. He'd taken a plea deal, 15 years instead of life. "Merritt Redmond paid me $120,000 to falsify Calvin Redmond's prescription records," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I altered the compound ratios, reduced the active ingredient to 15%. I knew what he was doing. I did it anyway." "Why?" Reeves asked. "Because I needed the money. Because I told myself it wasn't really murder if someone else was doing the killing." Hewitt looked at me for the first time. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Sorry doesn't unpoison someone. Atlas Newell took the stand next, 29 freelance tech specialist, all nervous energy and guilt. He'd hacked hospital systems and deleted Saskia's communications for $85,000. "He told me it was a corporate espionage job," Newell said. "I didn't ask questions. That was the problem. I didn't want to know." Brent Sinclair followed. He'd handled logistics, delivered equipment, coordinated the warehouse rental. His testimony was mechanical, factual. He'd already given up everything for immunity. The evidence piled up: USB footage, rental receipts, burner phones, bank transfers, medical records. Every piece building an architecture of guilt so complete it left no room for doubt. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from hearing your son's voice describe murdering your wife in front of 200 strangers. It's not sharp, not sudden. It's a slow drowning in plain sight while everyone watches and no one can help. The defense attorney tried, argued diminished capacity, childhood trauma, unreliable evidence. But even he sounded tired, defeated. You can't argue with a recording, can't cross-examine a paper trail. When closing argument is finished, Judge Callahan sent the jury to deliberate. I expected hours, maybe days. Capital cases always took time. They came back in 30 minutes. Fastest deliberation Callahan had seen in her career, she said later. Fastest because there was nothing to deliberate. The math was simple, the guilt undeniable. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the count of first-degree murder of Elena Redmond, how do you find guilty? On the count of attempted murder of Saskia Lockwood, guilty. On the count of attempted murder of Dove Redmond, guilty. On the count of attempted murder of Calvin Redmond, guilty. 4 more counts: kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, guilty, 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 guilty. Merritt didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sat there like he was listening to stock prices. 30 minutes to end a life. Judge Callahan removed her glasses, looked at Merritt for a long moment. In 30 years on this bench, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of criminals and victims and broken families. I have never seen such calculated evil. You murdered your mother. You imprisoned your wife. You tried to erase your daughter. You poisoned your father. And through it all, you showed not one moment of remorse, not one flicker of humanity. She put her glasses back on. Life without possibility of parole. Consecutive sentences on all counts. Bailiff removed the defendant. 2 officers lifted Merritt from his chair. He turned as they led him past my row. Our eyes met. He smiled, small, cold, triumphant. You think you won, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. You just proved I was right about you all along. Then he was gone. Shackles rattling. Door closing. 38 years of fatherhood ending in a hallway between a courtroom and a transport van. Justice served. Family destroyed. Both things true. Outside the courthouse, January wind cut through my coat. Saskia stood on the steps, Detective Ashford beside her. The press had scattered after the verdict, chasing other stories. Just the 3 of us left. Saskia touched my arm. Her hand was warm despite the cold. What do we tell Dove when she's old enough to understand? I looked at my daughter-in-law, 29 years old, 8 months removed from a shipping container, facing decades of explaining her father to her daughter. Behind us, the courthouse stood solid and permanent, built on the idea that justice could fix things. Ahead of us stretched years of therapy and custody hearings and midnight questions from a little girl who'd want to know why. The trial was the easy part. 2 weeks after watching my son sentenced to life, I sat in a different Lake County courtroom, asking a different judge for permission to raise the granddaughter he'd tried to kill. The question Saskia asked on the courthouse steps, what do we tell Dove, had no answer yet. Maybe wouldn't for years. But the immediate problem was simpler. Did the state of Montana believe a 56-year-old former mining engineer who'd raised a murderer deserved a second chance at fatherhood? Judge Patricia Morrison presided over family court with the same efficiency she'd probably applied to 2 decades of custody disputes and adoption hearings, mid-50s, sharp eyes, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She reviewed my file without expression. Mr. Redmond, I've read your petition. Walk me through your preparations. I'd spent 2 months preparing for this 15-minute hearing. Background check came back clean. Psychological evaluation cleared me as fit I paused. Despite the trauma, home inspection passed. I completed the 40-hour childcare certification program through Lake County Community Services. Dove has her own room child-proofed. Pediatrician appointments scheduled monthly. Emergency contacts filed. Judge Morrison made a note. Ms. Brennan, your assessment. Rachel Brennan, the Montana Child Protective Services social worker assigned to my case, was in her early 40s with the exhausted competence of someone who'd seen too many bad placements. She'd visited my house 3 times unannounced. Watched me change diapers, prepare bottles, calm Dove through a teething fit. In 20 years as a social worker, Ms. Brennan said, I've rarely seen a placement this stable. Mr. Redmond completed every requirement in record time. More importantly, the bond between him and the child is genuine. She reaches for him, calms at his voice, knows his heartbeat. The judge nodded. Ms. Lockwood, you've requested to speak. Saskia stood from the gallery. She'd gained more weight since the trial, color fully back in her face. But her hands still shook slightly when she approached the witness stand. She wore a blue dress I'd helped her pick out 3 days ago when she'd called and said she wanted to attend. Your Honor. Saskia said, 3 weeks ago, I filed a voluntary termination of parental rights petition with this court. Today, I am asking you to confirm it. The courtroom went quiet. I hadn't expected this. We'd discussed her attending supporting the petition, but not this. You understand that's permanent? Judge Morrison asked gently. I do. Saskia looked at me, then back at the judge. I can't be Dove's mother right now. Maybe not for years. I'm in therapy 3 times a week. I wake up at 2 in the morning checking locks on doors. I flinch when my phone rings. I'm not... Her voice caught. I'm not whole enough to give her what she needs. Ms. Lockwood. But Calvin is. Saskia's voice strengthened. He saved her from the river. Saved her from my husband. Saved her from a system that declared her legally dead. Dove knows his heartbeat. When she cries, she wants him. When she laughs, she looks for him. He's already her father. I'm just asking the court to make it official. I blinked hard, kept my breathing steady. Judge Morrison studied Saskia for a long moment. That's an act of profound love, Ms. Lockwood. I'll honor it. She turned back to me. Mr. Redmond, I do have one concern. You're 56 years old. Dove won't graduate high school until you're 74. That's assuming good health. Are you prepared for that responsibility? How do you prove you're fit to parent when your previous child is serving life for murder? Your Honor, I said slowly, I've already buried a wife, raised a son who became a murderer, failed at the most important job of my life. I met her eyes. I didn't see what Merritt was becoming until it was too late. I enabled him, made excuses, chose comfort over truth, and Elena paid for it. Saskia paid for it. Dove almost paid for it. The judge waited. I won't fail Dove. I can't promise I'll live to see her graduate college, can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I promise I'll see her every day. And I'll spend whatever years I have left making sure she grows up knowing love isn't debt, that family is an obligation, that she matters because she exists, not because of what she can provide. Silence filled the courtroom. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Morrison removed her glasses. Mr. Redmond, permanent custody is granted effective immediately. I'm also authorizing expedited adoption proceedings. You won't be her guardian, you'll be her father. Legally, permanently. She signed the order with 3 quick strokes. This court recognizes that sometimes families are built by choice and necessity rather than biology. Dove Redmond is fortunate to have you. The gavel fell. Just like that, I was a father again. 56 years old, and I was becoming a father again. Not to redeem the son I'd lost, but because the granddaughter I'd saved needed me to be more than grief. Ms. Brennan handed me the signed custody order outside the courtroom. Adoption paperwork will take about 60 days. Until then, this gives you full legal authority. Medical decisions, schooling, everything. Thank you. Saskia waited by the elevator holding Dove. The baby, 10 months old, now 30 inches long, 22 pounds, reached for me the moment she saw me, made the babbling sound that meant up. I took her. She grabbed my collar and pressed her face against my neck. She's yours, Saskia said quietly. She always was. I just needed the law to catch up. You can see her whenever you want. This doesn't... I know. Saskia touched Dove's foot, gentle. But not yet. I need to be healthy first. For her. For me. She left before I could respond, disappeared into the elevator with her therapist waiting in the lobby. That night I sat in the nursery I'd built in my spare bedroom, pale yellow walls, bookshelf, already filling with board books mobile hanging over the crib. I opened Dove's baby book, the one Saskia had started before Merritt imprisoned her. The hospital had filled out the first page. Mother Saskia Ann Lockwood. Father Merritt James Redmond. I drew a single line through Merritt's name, wrote my own underneath in blue ink. 4 months ago, I'd pulled a safe from a river at 2 in the morning. I'd thought I was saving my granddaughter. Turns out I was meeting my daughter. Tomorrow we'd start building the life Merritt tried to destroy. 6 years after I pulled my granddaughter from Flathead Lake, I sat on the same porch with the same army green thermos and watched her chase butterflies across the grass I'd once paced in terror. October 2025. Early morning light turning the lake copper. The thermos between my knees still held coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Not when Dove, 6 years old now, all flying dark hair and fearless laughter, darted through the yard with her butterfly net singing a song she'd learned in kindergarten about caterpillars and wings. Same porch, same view, different life. I was 57 now. My knee still ached when rain was coming. The scar on my palm from the safe's rusted edge had faded to a thin white line. but sitting here watching Dove chase monarch butterflies with the single-minded intensity of a child who didn't know she was supposed to die 6 years ago, I felt something I hadn't felt since Elena was alive. Peace. Grandpa Cal. Dove skidded to a stop in front of the porch steps, breathless and grinning. Why do butterflies only come in summer? Where do they sleep in winter? They migrate south, I said. Thousands of miles, all the way to Mexico sometimes. That's so far. She spun in a circle, net trailing. When I'm big, I'm going to follow them. I'll send you postcards from every state. I'll keep every one. She ran off again, chasing a butterfly that had landed on the fence post. Her laughter carried across the yard, bright and uncomplicated. She knew a simple story. Her daddy was in heaven watching over her, and Grandpa Cal had saved her from an accident when she was a baby. The full truth: Merritt's imprisonment, Saskia's trauma, the shipping container and the safe and the river waited in a locked box for when she was older, strong enough to carry it. Maybe 10, maybe 15, maybe never if I could help it. A car crunched up the gravel driveway. Pastor Stuart Bentley climbed out, gray-haired and smiling, carrying a basket of what looked like fresh bread from the church bake sale. He'd visited monthly since the hospital, checking in without preaching, just being present. "Morning, Calvin." Stuart settled into the chair beside me, the one that used to be Elena's. "She's gotten so big. She'll be taller than me by the time she's 12. Stuart watched Dove for a moment. 6 years ago, I prayed with you in a hospital waiting room. You asked God why he'd let this happen. He turned to me. Look at her now. There's your answer." I took a sip of cold coffee. I don't know if I believe it was God. Might have just been luck. Might have been me being too stubborn to let her go. Does it matter which? I suppose not. Dove ran up again this time, holding a yellow butterfly cupped gently in her hands. "Grandpa Cal, look. She landed right on me. Can we keep her?" "Butterflies need to fly, sweetheart. That's what makes them beautiful." She considered this seriously, then opened her hands. The butterfly took off, spiraling upward into the blue Montana sky. Dove watched it go without sadness, just wonder. "Bye, butterfly. Go to Mexico." Stuart left after an hour, pressing the breadbasket into my hands and squeezing my shoulder. "You did good, Calvin. With her, with yourself." After he left, I sat alone while Dove played and let myself think about the things I usually kept locked away. Merritt, 33 years old, now serving life in Montana State Prison. I'd visited once 6 months after sentencing. He'd refused to see me. The warden said he spent his days reading financial journals and working in the prison library. No remorse, no change. Just Merritt calculating the value of nothing forever. Saskia, living in Missoula, working as a paralegal, going to therapy twice a week. She sent birthday cards for Dove every year, signed with love and a promise, "When I'm ready." I didn't push. Healing had its own timeline. Elena, 19 years gone now. Sometimes I still reached for her in the morning, forgetting, but the grief had softened into memory's sharp edges, worn smooth by time and necessity. She would have loved Dove, would have been better at this than me. Time doesn't heal, it teaches you how to carry what broke you. The sun shifted. Afternoon stretched into evening. Dove abandoned her butterfly net and ran toward the lake's edge, the same stretch of shoreline where I'd dragged the safe onto the rocks 6 years ago. I followed slower now, my knee complaining. She splashed in the shallows, collecting smooth stones and arranging them in patterns only she understood. The water lapped gently at her rubber boots, same lake that had nearly killed her, same water that had tested every ounce of strength I had left. But now it was just a lake, beautiful, calm, home. I'd spent 30 years as a mining engineer pulling men from collapsed tunnels and gas leaks, and I'd saved dozens. But saving Dove was the rescue that mattered most, because it turned out she wasn't the only one drowning. What do you tell a 6-year-old about the father who tried to kill her, the mother who had to leave, the grandfather who became her dad? You tell her she's loved. You tell her she's safe. You tell her the truth will wait until she's ready to hear it. And you hope that's enough. Sunset turned the lake orange gold. Dove climbed the porch steps and into my lap without asking, settling against my chest like she'd done it 1,000 times. Because she had. Her hair smelled like grass and lake water and the strawberry shampoo we'd bought at the grocery store last week. "Grandpa Cal," she said quietly, "the lake is so pretty when it's orange. Can we stay here forever?" "We'll stay here as long as you want, sweetheart. This is home." She yawned, small hand wrapping around my thumb. Her breathing slowed, steadied. Sleep took her the way it took all children, suddenly completely trusting. I couldn't save my wife. I couldn't save my son. But I saved her, and somehow she saved me back. The last light faded from the lake. Somewhere in Montana, Merritt sat in a cell, serving life without parole. Somewhere in Missoula, Saskia was building a life that might someday include space for her daughter. But here on this porch with this child asleep in my arms, I'd found what I'd spent 57 years searching for. Not redemption, not forgiveness, just the simple grace of being enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 19 years making excuses for my son. I covered up his mistakes, convinced myself love meant protection instead of accountability. Don't make my mistake. When you see warning signs in someone you love, the lies, the manipulation, the lack of remorse, don't look away. I chose comfort over truth, and it cost my wife her life. It nearly cost my granddaughter hers. Family betrayal revenge isn't about getting even. It's about protecting the innocent. Stories like these, the kind you find in family Reddit stories, remind us that the hardest battles are within our own bloodlines. I believe God gave me a second chance when I pulled Dove from that lake, not to redeem my failure with Merritt, but to choose differently. In all the family Reddit stories I've heard since, one truth stands clear. Real love means boundaries even when it breaks you. Family betrayal revenge when righteous means refusing to let evil hide behind family. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in my place? Would you have worn that wire? And if you want more stories about standing up to family betrayal revenge, please subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and reflection. What matters is the lesson. God bless you, and remember, protecting the innocent is never the wrong choice.